Reach out to your heroes online. It's so funny. I was always so scared to do that, but I started just following people on LinkedIn. And so many of them will follow you on LinkedIn back. They're so nice. And you just talk to them and they talk to you back.
Welcome to Leaf Notes, the podcast that helps your business take root and grow. I'm Adria Marshall, seasoned business owner and speaker.
And I'm Sydney Mafuka, artist, illustrator, and small business owner.
Join us each week as we take you on a journey through the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. We'll dive into everything from social media strategy to protecting your business.
We'll even answer your burning questions such as, do I need a business plan? Should I form an LLC? Where should I promote my business? And so much more.
Together with our guests, we'll break down these topics into actionable steps, helping you build the business of your dreams.
So whether you're just starting or you're looking to scale, we got you covered.
So go grab your notebooks, your favorite beverage, and cozy up to receive practical insights and inspiration here on Leaf Notes. Let's go make your business dreams a reality.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Leaf Notes. I am super excited to introduce you to one of my friends. She's an amazing artist and is currently studying animation. And so today we're going to be talking about her journey and how she got to where she is as an artist and where she's going. So without further ado, welcome, Iman. I'm so happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Of course. So the first question I really want to ask you is, what is your origin story? Have you always loved creating? And if so, what mediums, what really drove you to pursuing a career in the arts?
So I feel like most artists will say this. I did start as a little kid. I started because both my parents have creative inclinations, even though they both don't do career now. My dad always loved to draw, and my mom really loves to write. And my mom was a big fan of literature, so she would always read me like stories or come up with stories and things like that. And my dad, I didn't grow up with him, but I would see him a couple times a year, and he would like to draw a lot, and he was a very quiet guy. So the way that we bonded was he would just give me a little piece of paper and I'd draw with crayons, like right next to him. And so I kind of combined those two because I love to come up with stories because of my mom, and I love to draw because of my dad. So I like to think in that way I kind of got like the best parts of them. And that's kind of what drew me to like using art as a way of storytelling, specifically with animation or concept art in general. And that's what kind of, I didn't even really know you could get a job in it, to be honest, until like my senior year of high school, when I just started looking more into like animation jobs or just art school in general, just like the thought of it. And it honestly wasn't until like the end of my senior year of high school where I was like, fuck it, I'm going to go to art school, because I was supposed to go to Auburn and be an engineer like my dad, but I really did not want to do that. And so now I'm here.
So taking that jump and going to art school, was that a scary experience? Did you ever feel afraid of pursuing this?
I was afraid, and then I was excited because I was afraid. That sounds really weird, but I'll explain it. So it's like I was afraid because both my parents are immigrants, and they both grew up very, in like poorer parts of Egypt, and they were able to come to the United States through education. Specifically, like my father, he became an engineer. He became really good in his field, and that was how he was able to kind of break cycles of poverty and come to the United States and have like a better, like give us, his children, like a much better life. So like there's always this like idea that a lot of immigrant parents have, where they are still kind of living in this very like survival mindset, because a lot of them do come from situations where they had to focus on survival. So a lot of them, despite having creative like inclinations or creative like talents, they would choose not to pursue those or put them down, no matter how much they loved it, in terms of something that they deemed more practical. And that was kind of how I grew up with my parents, where they always knew I could draw. They always liked that I could draw, but they didn't really encourage it because they were like, oh, we'd rather you do something like practical. And then the more I like thought about it, the more I was just like, they did make a lot of like sacrifices so I could be here. They did have to sacrifice their own like dreams so I could be here. But at the same time, because of all their hard work, shouldn't this is giving me the freedom to be able to think about, pursuing something I'm passionate about now that I'm not having to grow up in their same survivalist mindset they had to grow up in.
As a mom, how did your parents react when you made this decision to go to art school? Were they supportive, or were they cautious, or maybe a little bit of both?
At first they weren't like the most supportive, and then I sat down with my mom. We just had this very emotional talk where I just kind of cried about it, where I was just like, there's really nothing else I'm really that passionate about. Like there's nothing else that I want to work this hard for. Like I feel like if I do go into more practical field, I'm not going to be as great in it anyway, because I'm not going to be able to like focus on it. I'm not going to be able to like think about it. I'm always going to think about what would have happened if I did what I wanted instead. And she became a lot more supportive of it. My dad did grow up in a more difficult situation than my mom. So even he to this day hasn't fully come around to the idea. Like he'll still be like, what about architecture? Because architecture was what he wanted to do. Back in like the 80s or something, architecture was like the art hippie job, and now architecture is like the art like smart job. So he's like, architecture is good now. You should do architecture. His thing like voice. But he's still like he's like eased up. Like my mom now, she's the one who pays for my grad school. I didn't have as much help paying for my undergrad, except for my father did allow me to take out a small like parent plus loan in his name towards the end of it, which did help a lot. So they've come like around to the idea. Like my dad is more like accepted it, but he'll still make comments, and then my mom is the one who's like, she's now very supportive. She always wants to know what I'm doing, always asks what I'm doing, is financially helping me get through grad school right now.
So you mentioned that you're from Egypt, and something that I wanted to know was, how has your culture affected the way that you approach your work?
So if you see my characters, they're all very weird. And a lot of that is based off being like the weird brown kid, who came in. If I came to the States, I had like weird little accent. I didn't fully fit in with the other kids, but I also didn't really fully fit in with the other Arab kids as well, because since I grew up here and a lot of them didn't, there was still a cultural divide there, and then there was a cultural divide between me and like American kids. So I was very much the odd kid. And I do base a lot of like my artwork and my characters and the way they look off of that. Just like the fun like shapes I'd come up with, the fun things I'd like notice in the back of the class, since I didn't have a lot of friends. So I just look at people and observe them, and a lot of that. And then it does also form a lot of my like my drive for what I want to do. Like I was like like every single, I feel like, animation kid, I loved watching cartoons. Obviously, like I was very much obsessed with cartoons. And I remember being like loving cartoons, specifically like Adventure Time, where you kind of got to grow up with this main character. You got to grow up like physically and emotionally because of all these things his character was going through. It was the same things that like we were going through as children growing up. And it made me, as I got older, it made me like want to push so much for that like type of representation that you could feel in this white boy, that you just loved so much. And I wanted to kind of create that for my people, for like my people to be seen, especially considering that I feel like children's first introduction to the world in media is always through cartoons. I think so much of how people have been shaped has been by the stuff that they've consumed growing up. So much of what people know is okay or think is okay is because of how they grew up, and the things that they saw growing up. And so Pixar Turning Red kind of explains it the best, because they put like these characters, these little awkward, silly, like Chinese American girl, making her the main character, making it so that you could like so many teenage girls could relate to her and the things that she was going through. But at the same time, there was still this appreciation and this like love for the kind of girls who were her, who was her. The director was this little girl at one point, and so many immigrant girls who grew up in like the West were able to relate and see to that. And I want to create something like that.
I just want to say that your work is great, and I feel like you are already like off to an amazing start.
And your story's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of mentioned a little bit of this before, but if you hadn't chosen art as a career, given who you are now, not who you were in high school, what would you see yourself doing anything else?
I think probably like a childhood development psychologist.
Oh.
Like specifically like, or like therapist or something. My mom, she's a young adult and family therapist, And so, for part of like my grad program, we have to do an academic thesis to go along with our visual component, which is like our thesis film we're going to do. And so mine is specifically about like the psychology of animation, how animation can be used with like in childhood development as tools for like to allow children to process trauma and things like that. So I've been doing a lot of research into how like into art therapy specifically, or into how like I think specific cartoons was able to help children with autism, navigate like social situations. And I found myself really enjoying that and really getting into it and just getting into like the psyche of like the different stages of childhood development. I'm like, like if I didn't do art, this would be kind of cool. I'm very inspired as well by the idea of animation growing up with its audience. Like to me, that's why I think shows like Adventure Time have lasted so long and have had so much continuations and people aren't sick of it yet. Because Adventure Time was like Adventure Time was created for this young audience who at the time were like 9 or 10 years old. And then instead of trying to stay to this one audience, the show's creators instead allowed the show to be loyal to its original fan base. So as that fan base grew up, the show then grew up. Because you watch Adventure Time, the first like few seasons are very silly, very cute. There's like hints of something more serious there, but you don't really like see it until the later seasons. Then in the later seasons, you get like this a villain who's literally like the embodiment of like death and darkness, and you have like like main character Finn facing issues of like isolation and abandonment issues. Like there's one line I think is so funny. He's like, I don't like being abandoned. I'm sensitive to it. Moments like that where it gets like very, very serious, and then it's continuations of it. The most recent one was Fiona and Cake. And Fiona and Cake, the main character, she's in her mid 20s. She's facing like unemployment, not feeling passionate about her job, feeling lost, and like the world that she's in and things like that, feeling like she doesn't really fit in, which is something most people in their early to mid 20s right now are kind of facing. And part of why I think that show became so successful, it was supposed to only be for one season. People loved it so much, it was renewed for another season. And I think because it grew up like that, like stayed loyal to the original fans and allowed them to always have something they can fall back on while still keeping this very like fun, silly, wacky, magic element, is part of what makes it so successful.
It reminds me, I don't know if you remember this, Sydney.
Mm.
I don't know if they did this at your school, but for a while they were having teachers who actually grew up with the kids, right? And so you would have your same teachers from grade to grade to grade. Do you remember that?
No.
No. I don't know if that was in Hannah's school or some other school, but yeah, I thought that was a really cool concept so that even if you go like on your first day of school and you're in elementary school, you don't know
Mhm.
who's going to be in your class. At least there's going to be that one familiar face, that one person who knows you and knows your story and understands you. So I thought that was a really cool concept. So that's kind of what I thought about when you were mentioning that. I think there's a lot of psychology behind that concept, so it makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense.
And I wish most shows and also like and I'll touch base on what you just said, Mom, in a second.
Mhm.
But I wish that more shows were kind of like Adventure Time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That did that. Like, what if what if SpongeBob did that?
Right.
I'm just
Who would
saying,
he be now?
because like yeah. So I think that's really cool. And what you mentioned, Mom, like having that in actual life, because I don't remember having that. I remember having like different teachers every year.
Mhm.
Um, but I can imagine just knowing that there's someone there who knows your habits
Right.
and who's looking out for you.
Yeah.
It can feel really good, I'm
Mhm.
sure. Oh, so my next question was, what do you want people to feel when they look at your work?
Somebody once told me when they looked at my work, it felt like they were connecting with their inner child. And that sentence like stuck with me so much to this day that I think that's like what I want people to look at, to see it and like feel like a kid again. But in this very like fun, nostalgic way rather than like this helpless kind of annoyed way.
Totally. I think that's a feeling that we're all adults here. I feel like there's this misconception that we need to always be super serious and embrace like being super successful. I'm an adult. Like there was this one time, I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but it's gonna make sense. So I was listening to the radio one time and an Uber, and there was the adult Happy Meal, and I was so stoked about that. I don't even eat at McDonald's. I don't even like McDonald's. But I thought the idea of an adult Happy Meal was so cool because I feel like adults need cool things too. And the person on the radio was like, "Oh my God, no, we're too grown for that." I'm like, "When are you too grown
For a Happy Meal.
for a Happy Meal?
Yeah.
Right, to feel the joy. I want a toy. I want a toy. Yes, I am 25 and I want a toy." So, like what you mentioned with that feeling of nostalgia and feeling like I think just feeling young and being connected back to those days, those moments, I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think as adults, we need to embrace that more.
I think you're right. I think a lot of times we grow up too fast. We feel like we should be doing more important things, or, our parents tell us to take things more seriously. So we do kind of like abandon that inner child and leave her at the door and don't come back and pick her up. She's like, well, what about me? So I do think it's a really important thing to stay connected to that innocence and those values, those things that really bring you joy. Yeah, I think that's awesome.
And just those quirks and stuff, because
Yeah, the quirks, right?
there's like this saying, and you probably heard this as an artist, but it's like kind of connecting, like once you learn the rules, kind of going back and being a kid again when it comes to creating and letting loose, because like there's something beautiful about children and where their imaginations go. And I feel like sometimes it's easy, especially with art school sometimes, that
Yeah.
we lose that to try to fit a certain mold that was considered good when we were in school or praised or whatever. You have a really distinct style, and I was wondering, like, what was your journey to finding your style? And do you have any advice for anyone aspiring artists? 'Cause I know that's kind of like a struggle that we go through until somehow it just pops up out of nowhere and our work is just like cohesive. So do you have any advice also for people who are aspiring artists or artists that are still finding their style?
That's funny. I actually feel like I'm still kind of pushing my style a little bit more. I'd say the way that like always that helped me was one, I feel like they also tell you this in art school where it's like, oh, copy your style inspirations, take elements from those and those, help improve your style. And that does help. There's definitely a lot of truth for that. I did do that. But one thing I like noticed for animation, it also depends, I guess, on the field you want to work in. In animation, specifically with like stylized animation, they do want focuses on exaggeration. So a lot of my practices was trying to learn like exaggeration. And I always loved drawing people. Like I always loved to just like get my little sketchbook out and draw people I saw, or get my iPad and just doodle people around me or things like that. Or just doodle like my friends and stuff for their birthdays. And I would just, when I practice exaggeration, I would try to find like something on them that was very distinct. Like if I had a friend who always wore like big glasses and had straight hair. So I drew like a circle with straight hair and big glasses. And everybody immediately knew who it was. Or if like somebody had like a very like prominent nose or very large eyes, or always like wore some kind of like accessory or something, and then I would just emphasize that when I drew their caricature, and then every other feature was made to like serve this specific feature that was characterized of them. And that kind of helped push my style a little bit more, where now I feel like I just exaggerate everything. I just love I love drawing noodly limbs because I think that's fun. Big eyes or tiny eyes because I think that's fun. Very large noses or very small noses. I think that's it's nice because somebody did tell me when they see like characters like that are very like disproportionate but proportionate at the same time. They're like, oh, that's Iman. She was having fun with features again.
That's super cool because it's like a mix of like, you know what your goal is, but there's also a lot of practice that went into it until you kind of found your flow. And now it's something that you love.
Right. And so the second part though, right? So how would you advise someone who's trying to find their style? How would you advise them to go about finding it?
I would say first know what like your goal is. Like if you want to be an animation artist, what kind of animation draws you in? Like, is it animation where the characters are very stylized? Because some people are not drawn to that. I know a lot of people want to see more realistic type animation, like in Love, Death, Robots, or even like on the 2D front, you have Critical Role, the D&D show on Amazon Prime. Beautiful show. It's 2D animated and the characters are more realistic in their proportions and stuff like that. So I would first say like try to find your niche in art, what your goal is, if it's animation, advertising, graphic, anything like that. Know who your heroes are, because that is like, if those are styles you want to look like, you want to know who the heroes for you in this industry is, so you can look up to them or even connect with them on LinkedIn or something, or even just look up more of their work. And then you can kind of like build up from there, kind of build who you are from there when you're starting out, add in your own elements of maybe things you would have wanted to see. Like I knew this one guy who really loved like action movies, like action animated movies, and he would talk about how he didn't really see a lot of like black characters in action movies. And as like a black kid, he was like, well, I always wanted to like dress up as these guys, and I never saw anybody that looked like me, and all the white kids said I couldn't be any of them because I wasn't like black like them. So his style now is still very much like within that realm of realistic like action figures, but they're all like different types of black people. Like he did one, it was like a black character with vitiligo. He did this other character that was a black character with like long dreads, a more like Hispanic looking character at one point, a Middle Eastern character with like thick curly hair. Just basically putting his style is now just putting in people of color in action situations or high fantasy situations, and where you typically only saw white characters growing up.
You're gonna have to share that artist with me.
Yeah, sounds amazing.
Oh, I wanted to know, because I know that because you were in some of my illustration classes. So, were like, did you know from the jump from going to SCAD that you were going to pursue, you were going to be in the animation field?
So I knew I wanted to do concept art for animation. That was what I went in, but I didn't really think about like anything more leadership wise. Like I just wanted to draw things for people. I really wanted to do that, and I was fine like graduating having that degree. But then my final quarter of illustration, I took an elective in the animation department. It was a character design class. And for one of those projects, we were split up into groups. One person was the art director. We had to create this whole like pitch and set the style for it and everything like that. I ended up being the art director for mine because as soon as we got the idea, I had like a story ready because I thought the idea was really cool. And then we had like a little competition in the class, and my group won. And the professor pulled me aside and he was like, "Is this something you ever want to do?" And I was like, "Draw?" Like, yeah. And he's like, "No, I think you'd be like a good art director. Like, this is something you would think about." And I'm like, I didn't really think I could do it before, but honestly, this project did kind of give me a lot of confidence, and it did kind of make me realize I did want more. I did want to do like art direction and stuff, but to do art direction, you do need a background in animation, and illustration does help, but you can't just be, an illustrator to move up the ranks a little bit. And I did also want to try my hand at like creating a film because I had worked on so many films as well for other people. I realized I kind of wanted to see if I could also do it. That's part of why I went back, because of that professor. He's really cool. He wrote one of my recommendation letters. He's on my thesis chair. Like, this guy is still inspiring me like to this day at SCAD in the department. Shout out Professor Ozaparty.
That's awesome. It's great when you have a teacher, because there's so many. I mean, okay, I don't want to say that, but there are some teachers that really make a difference, and that, you think about them later on in life. Like, it was like a turning point having this teacher. Like, I remember my fifth grade teacher, right? She was amazing. So it's funny how you have those certain teachers that really do guide your path. That's amazing.
It sounds like you have an industry bestie.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
Honestly, reach out to your heroes online. It's so funny. I was always so scared to do that, but I started just following people on LinkedIn. And so many of them will follow you on LinkedIn back. They're so nice. And you just talk to them and they talk to you back. I connected with this like character designer I loved for so long, Taylor Crahenbull, on LinkedIn. And I'm taking an online class with him right now. But I had loved this guy for so long. I like one day was like, I wouldn't it be so silly, if I just messaged him? And I messaged him on LinkedIn just to be like, "Hey, I really love your work. I'd really love your opinions if you had any time on like my thesis stuff, because you are one of my inspirations, and I want to know if you have like any notes and stuff like that." And he was like, "Yes, absolutely. Thanks for reaching out. I love helping like people who come to me. Let me see your work." And now like I send him updates of my work and stuff like that, and he helps out. Like, so many of these industry guys are so nice. Like, they will help you if you reach out to them.
Okay, so my next question was, when it's at the end of your life and you're like 170 years
Oh
old.
my.
Real old. What is something that you want your work to be remembered for?
I think for how it made someone feel. I was talking to one of my friends about this the other day because she found the original pitch packet for SpongeBob online. It's pretty cool. The creator of SpongeBob wrote this 56-page document where he had all his concept art, his sketches shown, and then like plot summaries and ideas for SpongeBob episodes. No, then you could tell like from the ideas which episodes they ended up becoming. And she sent it to me, and I was looking at it and I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is so cool. And the creator died a couple years ago, and people say like that's when SpongeBob started to like get bad, because he was no longer there to write on it. But when you like look at it, you can feel like how much fun he had making it. And he was quite young when he died. I believe he was like in his 40s or something. He didn't have a very long life. But like you look at, I remember like looking at it and I just started like laughing because I'm just seeing like these designs. Remember the episodes they're in. I see like the descriptions of the episodes. I know where they were in and stuff like that. And I'm like, this man is alive forever, because of this. Like people, like people will think of like these, especially like our generation. We think of like the old SpongeBob episodes, and we think about him. We think about like what he's created and his humor, and so much of his humor came out in the shows, and you could tell when you look at the pitch packet. It's like this is this guy having a fun time. This is him just being really silly and goofy and wanting to share that with people around him, and that's part of why that show means so much to people. And that's kind of what I want to do, is create something, and then if I die, people can look back on it and be like, this is her. This is her like fun, silly humor. This is her kind of weirdness that we liked, and we're always gonna have this to like look back on and laugh.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I as a old SpongeBob
Right.
fan, like,
Yes.
that's very true. Like I can vividly remember certain episodes that I really liked. So that's really cool. And then my last question for you is, what advice would you give to the younger version of yourself?
I used to stop being so afraid of being a weirdo. Like I grew up in Alabama. I was a brown kid in Alabama. That already like makes you stand out a little bit just as yourself. And then I was a brown kid who liked to draw and was also like just I was a real big fucking weirdo. You think of like a cringy teenager. I was the cringy teenager. I was the one obsessing over like boy bands and TV shows and and like having posters and stuff like that on my wall. Like I was very annoying and obnoxious. But I remember being like so insecure about that, like feeling like so weird. And I feel like now that weird behavior, that like very awkward kid, is what is the one that's like pushing my stories now, that's making my stories fun, because everybody at one point was this strange little kid. I don't know whether they wanted to admit it or not. So I guess like if I could see like teenage me now, I'd be like, hey, don't be so afraid of this. Don't be so put off by this. This is a good thing. This is not a bad quality.
That's some good advice because there was this saying, and it always sticks with me now that I'm an adult. I wish it stuck with me when I was a teenager. But there's a saying that the nerdy ones or the weird ones always end up being like the most successful ones, and then the popular ones end up, kind of like that's their peak. You know what I mean? High school's their peak. And I think that's a really good way of seeing it, because I feel like as someone who's been kind of in the same shoes, except I was emo. I felt like I had to like change and fit a mold because other people thought I was weird, or would tell me I looked like a vampire, or would tell me like, and vampires are cool. I don't care now.
Seriously.
But like, there's so many people that are going to be like, oh my God, you're so weird. But that quirk it makes you different. And it's character. And like you said, it impacts your story. And for me, I feel like it impacts my art. So yeah, got some really, really good advice. Any final words, Mom?
No, this is just so great. I mean, I think your story is great. I think hearing about your family and the ups and downs and your honesty and your vulnerability, I think is really beautiful. And the fact that you're able to pour so much of that into your art to where when you see your art, like we know whose art it is and how it makes us feel, I think it's really amazing. If you can, do you have a question that you would like for us to ask our next guest?
I feel like you can tell a lot about a person by their opinions of cats. Yeah, no, like if they really hate cats or if they're just like cool with cats or if they really love cats. I feel like you should ask them about that.
So we'll ask how they feel
Just to
about
find out
cats.
who they are.
I guess this is where we can wrap
Yeah,
it
I think
up.
we're all wrapped up. Thank you so
Okay.
much for being on the podcast again. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to Leaf Notes. If you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment below and let us know what your takeaway was. Or if you're listening, take a screenshot, post on social media with your takeaway. This will help us reach more small business owners just like yourself. If you would like to leave us a review, head over to your favorite podcast app and drop that 5-star rating. Your feedback helps others find our show. And until next time, we hope your business takes root and grows.